Peter to sit down.
Good morning, everyone. What a buzz. 7:30, and I just love the energy in the room. It's great. I should cut you off, I'm sorry. But good morning to you all. I'm Christina Belperio. I'm the Manager of Policy and Programs with the Tourism Industry Council, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here to our Tourism in SA Matters Policy Forum, along with our special guests, Opposition Leader Peter Malinauskas and the Honourable Zoe Bettison MP, Minister for Tourism, Shadow Minister for Tourism. That close. Of course, just a reminder to put your phones on silent, please, for the morning. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Kaurna people, the traditional owners of the land of which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. I would like to acknowledge our special guests here with us today. Mr. Peter Malinauskas MP, Leader of the Opposition, Shadow Minister for Defence and Space Industries, Shadow Minister for Jobs and Member for Croydon. The Honourable Zoe Bettison MP, Shadow Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs and Member for Ramsey. Lee Oden-Walder, Shadow Minister for Police and Emergency Services. The Honourable Frank Pangello, MLC, SA Best. Ian Marcos, SA Best Candidate for the Legislative Council. Colin Sheeran, Defend Local Business Candidate for the Legislative Council. Our TiCSA Chair, Owen Loftus, and our Vice Chair, Penny Gale. CEO of LGA SA, Clinton Jury. Ian Hill, Managing Director of the Adelaide Economic Development Agency. Bridget Mather, CEO of Coorong District Council. Bill Spur, Chair of the Adelaide Venue Management Corporation. TiCSA board members, partners, industry leaders and other esteemed guests. Welcome. And finally, to all of you, thank you for joining us on this early morning where we can put tourism front and centre where it deserves to be. The fact that I'm up here welcoming you all this morning is a telling example of the unpredictability that COVID has thrown at our industry for the past 2+ years. Co-hosting with TiCSA today was meant to be our wonderful partners RAA Travel, but unfortunately in the past week we've had both Emily Perry, General Manager of Community and Corporate Affairs, and Gina Norman, General Manager of Travel and Distribution at RAA, sidelined for COVID reasons, and our very own CEO, Sean de Bruin, was also struck down over the weekend. We wanted to get to next weekend, but unfortunately COVID doesn't seem to take those instructions, so I know all three of them are very disappointed not to be here with you today. TiCSA and RAA Travel joined forces last year because we could see such strong alignment and passion to drive the success of our state's tourism industry, especially coming through the pandemic. Did you know that RAA Travel is one of the longest running travel agencies in the state? They've been working with and supporting tourism operators just like you for over 60 years. Both TiCSA and RAA Travel have been advocating for similar focus and investment in our tourism industry in the lead up to this election, including investment in infrastructure, skills and workforce, which are massive challenges for our industry. Together we've delivered over 10 regional events around the state, talking about why tourism in SA matters to local operators, politicians and candidates for the election. So this morning we're all looking forward to hearing from Peter Malinauskas about his vision and policies for South Australia's tourism industry as we look to recover and rebuild to our pre-pandemic glory. Following the presentation, both Peter and Zoe will join our Vice Chair, Penny Gale, on the couches for a Q&A session about why tourism in SA matters, deep diving into the issues and opportunities that matter to you most. But firstly, I'd like to welcome up to the stage our esteemed Chair, Malinauskas, to say a few words to you all.
Esteemed, wow, thank you so much. Just looking at Peter and Zoe there, thinking what's in their minds right now. The week leading up to the election, Tuesday, normally it'll be a Monday, but we had a long weekend. And we are within that sort of 7-day window. I can only imagine what's going through their heads, but I'm so thankful for you prioritising, as you have right through the election, tourism and tourism's recovery moving forward. I would also like to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So good morning. It feels like deja vu, doesn't it? I think we were here last week, round 2, and really excited this morning to hear from the Labor Party and their commitments towards tourism's recovery coming out of COVID, moving out of COVID or moving along with COVID and moving forward. But please, a big welcome to Zoe Bettison, Shadow Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment and Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs, please. Big welcome to Zoe. And of course, a big welcome to Peter Malinauskas, Leader of the Opposition and Labor Party, Shadow Minister for Defence and Space Industries and Shadow Minister for Jobs. Please, a big welcome to Peter. Now, poor old Sean, who's in his sick bed, he's doing much better, thank you. Saturday he wasn't so good, but yesterday he had an amazing turn of events and recovery. And it was very clear to me, Alan, he said, don't do the same speech twice, so I won't. And the good news out of that is that it won't go as long. So it'll be a very short, sharp 5 minutes I've been told to commit to, as we have more time for question time. There is no disputing how hard our tourism sector has been hit in the past 2 years. The pandemic wiping $2.2 billion in expenditure, a decrease of 27%. With our CBD hit the hardest, down a massive 47%. Our estimate, the Tourism Industry Council of South Australia, we don't have official numbers yet, but we estimate 10,000 jobs. 10,000 jobs have been lost within our sector in the past 2 years. The Tourism Industry Council of South Australia's Tourism Industry Barometer highlighted that over 60% of businesses are worried or very worried about their future moving forward. This was our survey through to the end of December. The focus moving forward has to be, what must we do to best aid our sector's recovery? Getting us back to the 8.1 billion and 40,000 jobs. Hope you're saying we are on that figure because they're grinding into our minds and our psyche. But our sector was worth 8.1 billion and employed 40,000 people at its peak pre-COVID. And we have a target of 12.8 billion to achieve by 2030. But right now we're down to 5.9 billion. Is a significant decrease. The Tourism Industry Council of South Australia, its board, CEO and team got very busy in the middle of last year to consult extensively with our members, the broader industry and stakeholders, to establish the industry's priorities, towards best achieving the most rapid recovery. I said in my speech last week that I really feel this election's outcome is going to be not just pivotal for our state, but it's going to be pivotal for tourism's recovery. Really important will be a government that understands and prioritises tourism at probably our most challenged time. It's going to recover a government with vision, partnership and support, especially for a sector made up of 95% of small businesses. The most vulnerable businesses are small businesses, and our sector is full of them. We are majority made up of small businesses. Tourism businesses on their own will not be able to drive our recovery. It's going to be dependent on that government support. In January, we released our 2022 Tourism Industry Recovery Agenda, setting out the industry's top 5 priorities. Not the Tourism Industry Council's top 5 priorities, industry's top 5 priorities for the next 3 years. We asked for $81 million per year for 3 years to aid that recovery moving forward. That represents less than 1% of the $12.8 billion expenditure target that we can see is achievable if we work together by 2030. The top 5 priorities, number 1 was driving demand. And the commitment by the Labor Party towards the South Australian Tourism Commission's budget, and I'll talk more to that in a moment, is significant, and it is our sector's number 1 priority, is the ability to compete nationally and internationally to at least have market share for tourism. Number 1 is driving demand. Number 2 is infrastructure and experience development. I think we saw with the Liberal Party that their major focus so far for tourism is in that area. It's infrastructure and experience development. Number 3 is business capability and workforce. We had a good discussion about that with the Premier last week, talking about that trainees and apprenticeships is not the answer for our sector. Again, we're made up of very small businesses. Apprenticeships and traineeships are a small part of the answer to actually answer the skill shortage. We also spoke last week about our sector, especially our CBD, hit 47%, down on the previous year, is seeing significant demand with the events right now this month. Keeping up is difficult. Those businesses can't hire quick enough. Jobs and careers in tourism has been damaged. So the ability to actually meet that demand, I've spoken to quite a few operators, especially CBD hotels, that are turning guests away because they don't have enough housekeepers, turning guests away because they don't have enough front office staff, is a very difficult part, but the most pivotal part of the puzzle that has to be worked out moving forward. And I know the Labor Party have thoughts and commitments on how best to answer that. Number 4 is business restart and reinvestment. Again, I'd like to acknowledge the Labor Party have put in a significant investment in that area too, partnering with the Tourism Industry Council. And last but not least, partnerships and collaboration. So important is that government understand tourism, the South Australian Tourism Commission alone, to not drive our sector. It is nearly every government department that we need to help drive tourism forward and into its recovery. Nearly every department. You actually see on the back of the little publication we've got on your desk there, we actually did a little sort of a web of government departments that all link to tourism that we need working together. The Tourism Industry Council of South Australia, as the key industry advocate for tourism in this state, has informed and challenged both sides of government to not forget tourism and its potential to deliver $12.8 billion and tens of thousands of jobs for South Australia. We thank the Labor Party for recognising tourism and event sector as a key driver of our state's economy and as a major jobs creator. People kept saying to me, elections are all about jobs, and I said, well, thank God for that. Tourism's at the core. Tourism is a great job creator. A Malinauskas Labor government has announced significant investment towards our sector's recovery, should they win government. An additional $40 million over 4 years towards new events, including business events. I deliberately mention business events. They are a huge economic driver. The spend of a conference delegate is significant, and have that part of, and I think it's really important to shine a light, to have that part of events. I think a lot of people just think of events and they think of leisure. Most critical is business events as well, and the Labor Party have acknowledged that. An additional $20 million over 2 years to the South Australian Tourism Commission to competitively market South Australia as a destination. This one's absolutely key. We monitor very, very closely what our competitors, other states and territories around Australia, what are our competitors and their governments doing to help drive their sector and gain market share. Our competitors and interstate and territory governments are investing significantly. We know it's the highest priority for our sector, and we've challenged both sides of government to invest so we can compete in that area as well. I go back to the point that tourism businesses alone cannot compete and recover our sector moving forward. An $8 million investment in the Fringe Festival to go global. I'm absolutely thrilled with this one because we know there is huge opportunity with the Fringe Festival, the Adelaide Festival, to achieve even more than what it has. They are significant successes in their own right, but moving forward with more investment, we know they can achieve so much more. $1.6 million over 4 years to build industry capability and profile careers in tourism. This is the Labor government partnering with the Tourism Industry Council of South Australia to help answer the skill shortage challenge and rebuild the reputation of a career in tourism. And finally, the return of the Adelaide 500 this December. I don't know how they're doing that. This December. Round of applause on that. It's a popular. I don't know how you're doing that. It's Adelaide 500. Look, it's been quite a hot topic and quite a debate within the tourism sector, but yeah, just judging by the reaction there, it's certainly a very popular one. So today, we look forward to hearing further from the Malinauskas Labor Party on their commitments for the critical period that lays ahead for our sector. Now, can you please welcome to the stage Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Peter and Malinauskas. Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for reading out our policy. Job done. Let's have the. Thank you, Owen and Penny and the whole team at TiCSA for this incredibly valuable opportunity for me and Zoe to be able to speak to this important organisation, but most importantly through all of you here, the tens of thousands of people that you employ within our state. I acknowledge Sean, who's obviously not here today with COVID. He's in the COVID club, I'm a member. There's about 180,000 of us across the state now that have had COVID and having gone through that experience. All I can say is God bless everyone associated with the vaccine. I think that's been an extraordinary achievement in the cause in the name of humanity. Can I acknowledge that we get together today on the lands of the Gale people and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. just want to share with you a quick story. So, I came into the Parliament at the very end of 2015, so basically the beginning of 2016. I was lucky enough to become a minister very quickly. And I was determined to make sure that I was a minister that went out and pressed the flesh at every opportunity I got. And I remember in those early days, I was at Manapara Shopping Centre in early 2016, and I was doing like a street corner meeting style event, just getting around and making myself available to talk to anyone that wanted to talk to a politician, which is always a risky exercise. But this one gentleman came up to me, and we started talking, and he was an ex-Holden worker who'd recently taken a package. And we're just chatting about things, and he was feeling it. He explained to me really candidly and really honestly about the fact that he was starting to really feel the fact that he was not in work. And I started to explore this with him in as much detail as I could get out of him. And it turned out that his income wasn't the issue, right? His package, he'd been working at Holden for a very long time, and his package, his redundancy, was quite substantial. And he had been living off this and basically enjoying the same standard of living that he'd enjoyed while he was actively in work. There was an imminent threat of losing his income, but that was still a little way down the track. But he explained to me that he was really starting to struggle. He'd been putting on weight, he was finding it difficult at home, and I said, well, what's all going, so I was chatting to him, and I said, do you miss work? And he said, yeah, I do. And he said, I miss my mates. I miss the experience of going to work every day and coming home at the end of the day. And it was a simple moment, but it just struck me as a very powerful example of where the true value of work lies. Because it's got nothing to do with the income. I mean, the income's helpful. I mean, we'd all like more of it. But the real value in work is the dignity it provides. And I'm a great believer that it doesn't matter what the job is. It doesn't matter if you're flying a plane or cleaning when it lands. It doesn't matter if you're the brain surgeon in a hospital or you're serving the meals as an orderly. It doesn't matter if you own the shopping centre or if you're the checkout operator working within it. It really doesn't matter what the job is. All work provides dignity. And when you parlay that experience that I encountered in the beginning of 2016, it was the experience that we were hearing over and over again at a time that the state was desperately concerned about reaching double-digit employment, which is what most people forecasted with the demise of GMH and everything around it. At that point, as a government, I was part of a cabinet that was absolutely resolved to doing everything we could to drive the demand for labour, to keep people in work, to ensure that they could experience dignity. And as a cabinet, when we were going through all of the options, one industry that kept coming up as one that could furnish us with demand for labour if we're able to grow the sector was tourism. Your industry is a labour-intensive industry. It's a service industry. You can't get machines to clean hotel rooms. You can't get machines to serve meals. You can't get machines to drive tourist buses and provide people an experience. Only people can perform that function. And that's why, as a government, in those last few years, Labor had a very deliberate disposition and a policy to invest in tourism. And another experience that I had, and this one, at least in my limited experience, was truly unprecedented, was that Treasury were, as in the state government, the Treasury, were more than willing to see to the investments that would drive demand in tourism, because it's measurable. The performance of the tourism sector is unique in that it is relatively easy to measure. You can measure the number of people coming in on planes. You can measure the number of people in overnight accommodation stays, which means there is a tangible, almost immediate indicator of how a sector is performing. So what you may recall is that there was a dramatic increase in investment for tourism marketing to try and drive the demand for labour. And it was a rare example of Treasury being rather willing to make those investments because they could see it working. So after the change of government early in 2018, I can honestly say that one of the things that really surprised me was that the Marshall Liberal government, in their first budget, started to deliver cuts to the tourism marketing budget. I think from memory it was in excess of 20 million, it might have been 23 million from memory. I'm looking at Zoe. Going forward over that 4-year period. That was a very substantial cut in tourism marketing. And I think an unwise policy, a policy that diminishes the power to grow this important sector. In terms of the jobs equation, the task before us is substantial. No doubt, when the Premier occupied this stage only a week ago, he would have espoused the economic virtue of the state performance. I don't necessarily share that view. Forgive me, but I don't think an economy that has the highest unemployment rate in the nation, the highest underemployment rate in the nation, the lowest participation rate on the mainland, real wage decline, I don't think that's an economy that is worthy of celebration. I think it's an economy that has got work to do. Yes, it is true that our unemployment level in some historical context is low, but what is the underpinning driving force behind that? Clearly everybody knows that in Australia that is underpinned by the greatest fiscal expansion in our living memory, if not ever, combined with the loosest monetary policy that we've ever seen, by and large. There ain't too many precedents for the RBA printing money or interest rates being as low as they are now. So those two policies are what has underpinned a heating up of the Australian economy, but we all know, every one of us in this room know, that both of those things are not sustainable forever. Low interest rates will not be a permanent feature of the Australian economy, and we've all read those forecasts recently. And secondly, governments can't keep borrowing more and more and more, which means when we do embark on borrowings, it has to be underpinned with a laser-like focus on economic growth, driving the demand for labour. And what I take to this election is a policy that unapologetically seeks to see South Australia's labour demand grow, but particularly in those sectors that have paid the biggest sacrifice during the course of COVID. The work that has been undertaken at Lot 14 has merit. That is virtuous. But what happens in the small footprint of Lot 14 does not represent an economic strategy for the entirety of our state. Not every young person, is going to be working on designing satellites or be a rocket scientist. That is just a established reality. Of course, we should pursue moving up the value chain in terms of the productivity of labour, but we also have to understand we have a solemn obligation to help those industries that pay the biggest sacrifices in the name of all of our safety. And that is best represented by you, by the hospitality sector, amongst a handful of others. So government has a responsibility to invest and invest now while we've got the opportunity to bring back those 10,000 jobs that Owen talked about us losing. So our policy seeks to drive that. Now Owen has rather helpfully gone through that list, but forgive me, I'll repeat it again, Owen, just for, in case anyone missed it. So we have announced a policy to invest $40 million over the course of the first 4 years of a Malinauskas Labor government, attracting new additional events to our state. Major events are a driver of demand. It's a policy that has worked time immemorial. We know that it was critical to Victoria's economic recovery some time ago. It was an active policy pursued by the Kennett government and pursued by Labor governments ever since. We do believe that a $40 million investment to go out and actively pursue events is critical. We will reinstate funding for other events that have been cut. I'll come back to that in a moment. We are going to inject, and this is an injection, of a $20 million boost into tourism marketing starting almost immediately. That's $20 million over 2 years. $15 million in year one, and an additional $5 million in year two, over and above what the Liberal Marshall government is offering in tourism marketing. Now, you can't turn on your TV set at the moment without seeing a political ad. That'll end soon. But if you're not watching a political ad, you might see ads from other interstate jurisdictions trying to attract visitors from South Australia to go to Melbourne or what have you. We've got to be in other states' television sets, and we've got to do it quickly. There is pent-up demand for travel domestically and internationally. People are bursting at the seams to get out there and travel, and if we don't compete hard, we will miss out on that opportunity. So now is the time to invest. Now is the time to inject a substantial pool of funds in tourism marketing, and we know it works because it's worked before. So if we don't act, we will miss this opportunity, and that will be an expense. And of course, once you get someone to travel once, when they return home, there's every chance, if you do your jobs well, and I know you will do, that they will tell someone else, and of course word of mouth is the most powerful tool that we have. But if someone travels from Sydney to Melbourne rather than Sydney to Adelaide, then that will have an ongoing impact. So we've got to act and act quickly. We will invest $2 million into nature-based tourism and marketing that specifically as a destination. The contract for tourism marketing will be awarded locally. Now I'm going to say what the Premier won't. That Old Mate campaign, I think, was appalling. I think it was daft. And I think that everyone who has any association with that, Ian's laughing, don't take it personally, Ian. I don't think that worked. I think we want to be a little bit more dynamic than what that campaign had to offer, but we're going to get a South Australian company to market South Australia a bit better than I do with a degree of passion and vigour. We do think TiCSA is worth some support. It's an important industry advocacy group. You deserve to have an independent and powerful voice. But we also want to make sure that TiCSA has the ability to invest in capacity building. And that's why we've announced a $1.6 million program to provide funding to TiCSA to do that. I am particularly interested in TiCSA making a considered effort invested in business coaching, as well as a program to encourage young people to consider tourism. You will perform that function better than government. Okay? Government going out there and trying to tell young people to work in tourism, the reality is you will do a better job of selling your industry than government. And we're willing to make a modest investment. It's a small investment, but nonetheless it gives TiCSA a start to be able to do that. The fringe. Now the fringe, the investment from the state government, given the importance of the fringe, is actually relatively small beer. They don't get much money considering how iconic an event it is to our state. On what day is it? Tuesday. So on Sunday night, I was walking through the garden with my deputy leader, Susan Close, and we were chatting to people. And it was such a beautiful experience. It felt so human. People were out in warm weather. There was just such a electric, happy sentiment that was palpable. You could almost breathe it as we were walking around the event. And this is something that is worthy of celebration. From there, we walked through WOMAD. We were there just to chat and press the flesh. I haven't been to WOMAD for years. It was amazing. I spoke to a couple of people that had come from interstate for the first time. and they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe what they had stumbled across. And I asked them, I said, well, what made you come here? So I was here for a wedding, and my mate told me to go to Woburn. They hadn't travelled to South Australia for Woburn or the Fringe. They were here through another experience. So I started to have this conversation with this interstate couple, and I said, do you hear much about the Fringe or WOMAD or any of these events interstate? They said, no, not really, sort of, not really. We have got a job in front of us to grow these events. They're big in our minds and consciousness, but I think there is a danger for the state making an assumption that the rest of the country, and for that matter the rest of the world, actually knows about Mad March and the events they're on. So we've got to go out there and make the investments to make these bigger and capitalise on that opportunity. So we've got a $2 million per annum investment to do that. I've also announced a very substantial package for the live music industry, which isn't necessarily important to all of you, but it is a substantially important one. Regarding the TiCSA, I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm at a shopping centre, I was at Golden Grove Shopping Centre, a gentleman comes up to me. So, you know, you're handing out shopping bags and so forth, and most people sort of don't go out of their way to engage with a politician, and they can be forgiven for that. But this fellow came up to me, and he had his son with him, who my guess was about 10 years old, and he goes, all right, what are you going to do for me if you win? And I said, well, you've got your lad here. You know, one of the big passions I've got is education policy. If your son's going to be able to compete in an increasingly competitive global labour market, then young people have to have all the skills. He goes, yeah, schools are important. How about my job? And I said, well, if we want to think about the long term, you know, hydrogen is a fuel of the future, and we've got a big plan around the hydrogen industry and growing that in our state. We've got a hydrogen jobs plan. I could just see his eyes glazing over. He goes, yeah, look, listen, mate, whatever, just bring back the LA 500, you got my vote, and then walks off. And I didn't know if I should be heartbroken or happy. Rest assured, I reminded him that we have a policy to bring it back. But this is an important event. People care about it deeply. And I don't think I'd be going out on a limb and saying that in comparison to some of our other events, this is one that everyone interstate knew about, because we did it and did it well. So we are going to bring the LA 500 back, and we're going to bring it back this year. In terms of your question, Owen, Supercars came to me and said, we want you to commit to bringing it back in 2022, because they were attracted to having the last race of the year rather than the first, and there's a story behind that. We agree with that principle. We do think it should be the last race of the year to get it out of February, March. But I said, if you want me to commit to it in 2022, you have to demonstrate to me that that can happen. And I'm not going to make that commitment publicly without seeing a substantial demonstration of the fact that this can actually happen. And to their credit, they went away and did the work and provided us all the assurances we need to make that commitment. So that race will be back in December this year. I finish with this. You've done an outstanding job over the last 2 years. You've paid an extraordinary sacrifice. The light at the end of the tunnel, if it's not already here, it's approaching us incredibly quickly. Hopefully that is maintained for a sustained period of time. But we get a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rebuild from a global pandemic. This doesn't come around again. If everything goes well and we have passed the worst of COVID, we get one shot at recovering from this moment. So what you need is a substantial policy to realise that opportunity. I present that serious policy to you, and if we do get elected this coming weekend, it would be an extraordinary privilege to be able to work with your industry closely to ensure that we capitalise on that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I think we could all stay listening to your stories for another half an hour, but we've got some questions and answers to proceed with. And if I could invite the Honourable Zoe Bettison up to join me on the couch, and our TiCSA Vice Chair Penny Gale will be your Q&A MC.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks very much for sitting down on the couch with me, or the three chairs, guys. Before we start, just a couple of questions. Who's already voted? Many people here pre-voting, right? How many people know who they're going to vote for? How many people are How many people are undecided? Well, if you could all stay behind afterwards, Peter wants to talk to you. So we've got some questions here that I've put together, but and you have to forgive me because they're not going to be necessarily all about tourism, because we have some time. We've left 20 minutes with questions from the floor for people who might want to be a little bit more pointy end about tourism. But it just seemed to me such a great opportunity when we've got potentially the next Premier of South Australia in this room with potentially the next tourism minister. In fact, I must say, Christina made that little faux pas about introducing Zoe, but we had another one. So the very final running order that came through on Sunday night says policy forum breakfast Premier. So there's two, either we're jinxing you, or if we call it first, we want that accolade. Thank you.
I don't think anybody knows what the outcome of this election is going to be. I think this election is going to be close. And I always think that predictions in politics are foolhardy, particularly so far this last 10 years. And people can often people would be right to expect the unexpected in the current political environment. So, look, I'm entirely at ease with the judgment about the future of our state being in the hands of the South Australian people, and they will ultimately decide.
Well, it actually comes down to a few marginal seats, I believe. Of course, I'm sitting on one of them in Adelaide. And a lot of the campaigning, I actually live in the seat of Adelaide too. And it's been a very interesting campaign. I've never seen such negative core food posters at a campaign, Peter. And I wouldn't mind some thoughts from you about how you deal with that, because it seems to be that the ones from the Labor side, might not be you, it might be this CNFEU, have been particularly nasty, if I can say. What's your view on how you promote your party and its views in an election campaign?
Well, my personal preference is for the political discourse to be orientated around policy. Right? And the government yesterday basically put the queue in the rack and hung up the boots. Their policy announcements are over. I'd just invite you in your own minds while you're sitting here, just to ask yourselves, well, what is the government's policy that they've got planned for the next 4 years? I mean, the Premier talks a lot about what they've done, but what's their plan? Like I'm paying attention more than most, and I'm not exactly sure. So I would like the political discourse to be around policy. In terms of the Labor Party's campaign, and I can't speak for others, but in terms of the Labor Party's campaign, we've run a far more positive campaign. And if you look at the TV ad ratio in terms of positive versus negative, I think it's clear that we're on the positive side of the ledger versus the negative. That's because we've got a story to tell, we've got policies to prosecute an argument around. And I would love nothing more than to have the 1.6 million, 1.7 million South Australians, particularly those of voting age, to be spending time reading policy.
But you gave that example before of the person who wants the race back. He doesn't care about policy.
Yes, he does. He wants the race back.
But that's not a policy. That's just an announcement. That's an easy announcement to make. I mean, personally, I think it's great that you're talking about policy, but I'm not sure how well does that resonate with people. Even the V word, vision, you don't actually hear that much anymore.
Well, Penny, you should come to a few more speeches I've given.
I've seen a few.
Look, if we're candid about it and honest about it, I think it is true that there is a cohort of the electorate that doesn't spend an enormous amount of time going to political parties' websites and downloading policies and reading it all. And I do lament that. But I also think people can be forgiven for it. I mean, most working people, small business people, They live exceptionally busy lives. You've got a lot on your plate. You're thinking from one hour to the next about the latest challenge that you're encountering. And then you've got to balance whatever family obligations and responsibilities you have. I mean, that's tricky, right? So I understand why people aren't traversing through piles of policy. But I would say this. At a time when we see liberal democracy under threat in various places around the world, and obviously Ukraine is the most recent example, I hope that Australians wake up and think, look, I know that this political process is frustrating and tough, but geez, it's good. I mean, it is good. Fundamentally good. And there's a saying that a quote that I like. It was by a US Supreme Court Justice by the name of Felix Frankfurter. He's passed away, but he said, the highest office in any democracy is the office of citizen. And he is absolutely right. It's not the Premier or the Prime Minister, it's you. You have the highest office in the land. You determine the outcome. You determine the policy. Not the politicians, you do. But that brings with it a civic duty and responsibility to read the policy, to care about the policy. And I wish, to the extent that people understood that with those rights and privileges of living in a democracy does bring with it a responsibility to care about policy, the more that we put a value on that, that's a good thing.
To do that, really, we need to be teaching civics in schools. I mean, kids should be aware of what policy is about. Is there anything in any of the Labor Party's policies in how we could do that so that we start building a more informed public?
Look, that is absolutely necessary, and I'm a big believer in civics in schools. I can't isolate a policy announcement we've made to deliver on that, but of course anything you do around school curriculum and so forth, particularly of that nature, has to be done with bipartisan support. And that is certainly something we're alive to. But ultimately, the function of leadership matters, and we have to prosecute the argument that you've got to care about who you vote for.
I'm going to ask you a question now, Zoe. Why do you want to be the next tourism minister for South Australia?
Well, tourism is one of our key economic drivers in South Australia. A few years ago, I came up with a slogan called Tourism Equals Jobs. And I did that after the Marshall government cut the tourism budget. And I looked around and said, who's with me to protest this? And so what I needed to do was make sure I was going out advocating how important tourism is. Now, more than 40,000 South Australians were employed in tourism before COVID. 18,000 businesses involved in tourism. It's a huge part of our economy. But people don't necessarily think that. They might think about primary industries. They might even think mining. So we have work to do, and I'm keen to do it.
Thank you. Can I just perhaps turn for a minute and talk about technology, and in terms of how technology has worked, or you think it works for or against the election process? I mean, we can't move without our phones. Social media is the way most of us get our information. What's your approach to that in terms of campaigning? And do you think that these days makes it easier or harder to get your message across?
No, it's harder. Yeah, it's definitely harder in my view. Look, social media is an incredibly powerful tool. That goes without saying. But I do worry about the fact that it contributes to the polarisation of political discourse. That worries me a bit. Whereas in the mainstream media, like if you're following politics on social media, it's pretty partisan, right? You tend to like the pages of the people that you agree with, and then it constantly reinforces your worldview. Whereas in the mainstream media, you've got a far better chance of saying, well, person A says X and person B says Y, and people can use their critical faculty to hopefully form an objective view. So that the use of social media worries me, but it is here. You have to use it, and that has completely changed the nature of political campaigns. And the reality is, it's a format that you can't not be engaged with.
So do you have a social media campaign as part of your campaign?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, every political campaign.
So is it hard to judge exactly the response? I mean, you take off your shirt, you get into a pool, and apparently a lot of 18 to 35-year-old men now know who you are. But I suppose the best, and I don't know if you planned this as part of your campaign, but I don't know who saw last night. There was a great, I think it was Facebook, you and the Liberal candidate from Croydon.
Oh yeah.
And there was something like 70 odd comments, and it was the most positive response to any event or media stunt within the campaign. And I'm just wondering, how did you think that's how that would go?
So I'll tell you what happened. So my Liberal Party opponent in the Senate Croydon, a gentleman by the name of Michael Santagata, he walked into my lecture office and introduced himself, and I wasn't there. And said, "Oh, look, just the same today, reaching out to Pete, if he wants to touch base, I'm more than happy to." And I thought that was a very generous act of him. I thought that was a class act. And so naturally I contacted him back. And I said, "You want a cup of coffee or have lunch?" And we took a few days to arrange, but we ended up doing it on Saturday. And we had a quick bite to eat in Queen Street there, and it was really good. It was really good. And then he had a photo of me and I had a photo of him, and I said to him, "Are you okay if I put this up on Facebook? I think it's something a bit different." He said, "Yeah," he was fine with that. So I did. I didn't know how it was going to go. Social media, it's hard to predict, but I just thought that was a really class act from a good man. Well, I hope losers. And I think there is an appetite in the community for people to know that, sure, there are points of difference, but there is also a common set of values that's probably more powerful than the ones that make us different.
So do you think most people see the positive side of things or the negative side of things?
Ask me on Monday. Look, fear is a powerful motivator in everybody. It's part of the human condition. Being positive, does that outweigh that? I hope so. Fear campaigns are part of elections. They're not going away. But I think there's a little part of all of us that hopes that the positive wins the day rather than the fear campaign. I certainly hope that. That's ultimately up to people.
So would you ban cornflakes? I mean, there's all the ones you see around town are pretty negative. There's nothing positive there.
Well, they're pretty negative both ways. No, I wouldn't ban them. And the reason why I say that is because, as frustrating as I might be, or I might get about the political discourse sometimes, the one thing that would frustrate it even more is having a government impinging upon our liberal democracy and allowing people to prosecute a political argument. We've got to place a high value on that. And this is the thing, like, people who want a government to tell them about what the political discourse should or shouldn't be needs to ask themselves, are they fulfilling their duty to objectively analyse all the information that's on the public record? So we don't want governments. I mean, governments should. There's no problems with having a regulator fact-checking things, but we don't want and stopping mistruths and that those provisions exist within our electoral act. But we wouldn't want to get to the stage where we're impinging upon the speech in a liberal democracy.
Now, and I realise it says on my running sheet that it's time to open it up to the floor, so I'm just wondering if anybody has got any specific questions for either Peter or Zoe. We've got a roving mic and we've got some hands up. That gentleman there first.
First Well, thank you for taking questions from the floor. My name's Trevor Anderson.
Did that happen last week?
No.
Thank you.
My name's Trevor Anderson. I'm from SA Backpackers. For many years, the number of backpackers coming to South Australia has been declining, both in numbers and as absolute market share. In November 2019, the Premier Stephen Marshall met with leaders of the visitor economy, and when presented with the direct expenditure of the SA backpacker tourism industry, his response was, "That's not much." Based on the apparent expenditure of SATC on marketing the backpacker industry over the last 10 years, this is also a view held by them. During COVID, it's become absolutely clear to the whole country that the value of the backpacker industry is far greater than the direct expenditure, with obvious and significant contributions of youth and backpacker travellers to the agriculture, construction and hospitality sectors, as well as the making a valuable contribution to creating a diverse and inclusive society. Post-COVID, we now need to compete with the world and the rest of Australia for these travellers. So my question is, if elected into government, will you give an undertaking to provide $2 million each year to fund a 3-week South Australia Youth and Backpacker Festival to create South Australia as a destination in the minds of youth and backpacker travellers, and provide support for the success of major Australian economic sectors and the thousands of SMEs that work in them?
Thank you, Trevor. Look, thank you for reaching out. I disagree with the Premier. I actually think the backpacker sector is incredibly important. And it's important because we want people to connect with South Australia when they're young. We want them to come back for their honeymoon, to bring their children back, and when they retire. And that starts young. And you've talked adequately about the opportunity for the backpackers to work, not just in tourism, but in our agriculture industries as well. Look, I'm not going to commit to the figure, and you and I are meeting later, but I'm really interested because I think a backpacker festival would be fantastic. One of our challenges here, prior to COVID, is we only had 4% of international tourists coming to South Australia. So our biggest challenge is getting people here. If we can get them here when they're younger, we know we have a lot to offer. We know they'll come back. So I think they're an ideal market for us to connect to more strongly. And I also think we've seen a renaissance where people haven't been able to travel. They haven't been able to do that gap here. And the restrictions of COVID have made people realise there's more to life. And to take that time at that age, South Australia is an ideal spot for them to take their time to get to know themselves, to grow up a bit, and to spend time in our regions. So I'm very keen for the festival, and we'll continue to talk about that.
I think that's a maybe. Yes, this gentleman here. Down the front.
Hello, it's Colin Shearing here to Defend Local Business. We're standing up for the many, many small businesses here in South Australia. And indeed, people ask me how I've been advocating and been on the hustings. I've actually been on the hustings for probably around about 25 years. Very important that small businesses, and I welcome your announcement for the tourism industry and the 18,000 small businesses that they commit to this particular industry. I've been going on about the last 4 years that we need a small business minister. We don't have one. We've got 143,000 small businesses across the state. I'd like to know 2 questions. One is, how you as a Labor government, if you get in, are going to engage and listen and give us transparency as a community of small businesses and their ecosystems? But also, are you committed to a small business minister and also to strengthen the powers of the Small Business Commissioner?
Well, we do have a shadow minister for small and family business, and our intention is to have that in government. In terms of engagement, I would simply point to the way we've conducted ourselves over the last 4 years, and the way I've tried to conduct myself over my working life. I know Zoe has been very actively engaged with your industry, particularly through your industry representatives, on a highly frequent basis. I mean, it was in June 2020 when we started our campaign to have tourism vouchers. The Northern Territory was the first to announce that policy. As soon as we saw that policy announced, we thought that was a good idea. And Zoe and I did a press conference in the pouring rain in Elder Park, advocating for that policy, which was done in conjunction with advocacy from the industry. We were able to get that policy up. The government eventually delivered on it some months later. But Zoe's always available. I'm always available. In terms of all the industry leaders, the chairs, the CEOs across the state, regardless of the industry, they've all got my mobile number and use it frequently. We will be open and engaged. And to go to the gentleman's point earlier, I'm not afraid of taking questions from the floor. I mean, if you're the Premier of the state, your MO can't be, having a glass jaw, right? If someone criticises you, you don't put them in the freezer, you engage with them. Now that doesn't mean you agree on everything all the time, and when you're in government you can't do everything. You've got to have the capacity to say no to people. But you've also got to have the willingness to listen and front up, answer questions, have the courage of your convictions to stand up for what you believe in. And if you said no to someone, tell them the reasons, and that's it. But you've got to be willing to engage. That's the way I've always operated and will continue to.
Yes, sure, Zoe. So look, I've spent the last 4 years as the Shadow Minister for Tourism reaching out, and I set myself a KPI that when people started calling me, I knew that they could see that I was someone who could hear and advocate for them. And the one thing I heard from our very small to medium enterprises in tourism is they were spending a lot of time working in their business. And the uncertainty of COVID meant they were more hands-on than ever before because they weren't able to sustain the staffing levels. And so when we were looking at our policy, and the Tourism Industry Council spoke to us to say the traditional way of training and certification just doesn't work. And so they said to us, what we found is these short courses in the areas where there's skill gaps and business knowledge needs to be improved is what works. And that's where we've come up with the policy for the $1.6 million of support for business capability to help attract young people into this industry. And it's because that time that we've taken listening to the actually now less than 18,000 businesses, because unfortunately not everyone survived this period. But we know they want their businesses to grow. And what they want is support at the best times. They also want regular support and not having to beg for it. But they want to grow their businesses, and they know where they've got gaps, and they want to take a small amount of time out of their day to brush up on those skills. And that's why we support that policy.
Any more questions? Yes, down the back there.
I probably don't need a microphone. I am Jim Clear Sources Media. When I first moved to South Australia more than a decade ago, the majority of our license plates call ourselves the Festival State. Now you wake up every week, there's a space state, defense state, whatever state. What slogan would you put on our license plate?
I don't know how much value there is in slogans on license plates, but look, the truth is the defence and space sector is an important one to our state. It's a sort of industry that does represent the sort of growth that I want to see moving up the value chain in terms of labour productivity and the like. But that's not to say that the festival state tradition is a powerful one. And I don't know if we've been putting the effort in to be able to legitimately claim that mantle. Right, so like take Queensland for instance. Brisbane have set about a really ambitious policy around the arts and cultural sector, and tourism and arts around that sector has been growing quite rapidly, and we haven't kept pace with those investments. So that has helped inform our investment in the fringe. I also think that when it comes to the festival in particular, there is the potential to grow private capital investment in the festival itself because of the different demographic, different type of event. But you've got to be willing to contribute to constant evolution in order to be able to maintain that status. I think the festival, under its current artistic leadership, has actually had a renaissance over the last 5 years, but that needs to continue, and we're committed to it. But I haven't turned my mind due to license plate slogans. Maybe when Port wins a premiership, we can sort something out.
Okay, down the back, we've got a couple, we've got 5 minutes, so can I ask people on table 13 next? Just to keep the question brief, so we can get the last two in.
First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that we're sitting here on Ghana land and acknowledge my great-grandmother, Mary Manala. My name is Jeanette Miller. I advocate for the SA Aboriginal community. I run the Black Lives Matter rallies and advocate in between any issues. So today, I'm here to hear about how Aboriginal SA community will fit in tourism. So my question is, acknowledging Aboriginal country is always at the beginning of every event for government and non-government organisations and sector. We hear about Aboriginal SA tourism industry and the skills shortage, and it's an 8 billion industry here, and we're most businesses and tourist operators would be operating on Aboriginal land. The oldest living culture in the world. So, where does our SA Aboriginal community and the Aboriginal Affairs Department that I see written in the program, where do we fit in with the 5 policies that you put forward, and in this tourism community with all state government departments and the collaboration that you talk about for partnerships in our community? We'd like to see more cultural events such as the Spirit Festival that ran over 2 days. I can help you research that one, Zoe and Minister. So I don't, as an Aboriginal person, I don't understand why the tourism industry has not tapped into this culture of ours, because if we want to be deal breakers and movers and shakers in SA, like we are, I recommend that you engage with your Aboriginal local people, build up the skills and the people in your area, close some gaps on the floor in community, because if you build it, I know my people will come, because they would love to sell their culture, not just to locals and interstate, but also to the world, because we know why the tourists come here. They come to see my culture. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. Look, I think simply we can do much better. And I've seen such a change in even the last 5 years of our acknowledgement of country and our true recognition of this oldest civilization that ever existed. And how we only walk here because of the stories and the commitment to country that's gone before us. I have a particular interest in developing Indigenous tourism. I did spend 6 years up in the Northern Territory and saw some great examples how when you work together, you can actually build a sustainable product that is world renowned. So I'm very, very keen to continue to work with you on that. We've already made some announcements as a potential incoming government about our recognition about Aboriginal South Australians. We don't know enough. We don't teach enough about our history and the importance. We put money aside for some public art and statues in recognition. Look, I think we can talk about food and wine, we can talk about our beautiful regions, but really we have an incredible moment in time to share the history of our Indigenous culture and their commitment to passing on those stories to the next generation. Australia is very unique in that respect, but we need to support you. And one of the issues I've heard from people is a lot of the siloed nature. So when people do want to start a business, they do want to work with traditional owners, it's very challenging. And so I would like to work a more collaborative style when we see that there's an opportunity, rather than letting the barriers get in the way, to work how we can move that forward. So thank you so much for raising. I do think that's an incredibly under-resourced area that is something that people are drawn to Australia to understand more about. Thank you.
Right, now I'm afraid we've run out of time. Can I just ask you both, everybody, to give a huge round of applause for our two candidates sitting over
Yes, thank you, Peter and Zoe. That was a really great session, and we really had some quite powerful questions there. You know, the impact of the backpacker industry, small business, and Indigenous tourism, and many, many more if we had a few more hours to dive into them. But what it says and shows is that tourism is so diverse and it is such a complex industry. But for our state, it's just full of potential and opportunity, and it's really great to hear both of your passion and commitment to our sector should you win in a few days' time. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. That concludes our Why Tourism Matters for South Australia Policy Forum breakfast. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and please feel free to stick around and network for a little bit longer, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.